we'll move into the discussion right now, and I'll let Maddie facilitate that.
Yeah, so as Max said, we have 20 minutes set aside for discussion. So I know like Malcolm had a question earlier that Alex, you addressed in the chat, but if you want to speak to that again, we can. Or if anyone else has any questions, we open up the floor. We can help you unmute and you can talk to whichever speakers, or if any of the other speakers have issues or comments they want to address based off other people's presentations, please feel free. If you want to talk, you can throw up a comment in the chat box. We can unmute you. If not,
could be wrong, but I think people can unmute themselves at this point. Let me know if that's incorrect.
I don't think people can.
Okay.
Alex, do you want to talk about what you addressed with Malcolm's comment or question, excuse me?
Sure. And yeah, Malcolm's question, I'm trying to find it real fast, was basically sort of like, what does the state monitor in terms of our, I'm guessing the lease fallow type projects. And, you know, really what we look for, I mean, first off, I mean, a lot of these projects are driven by on the ground partners, and, you know, we play largely a financial supporting role and sort of policy role in supporting those projects. But what a lot of those pilots are looking at are, water leasing, especially temporary leasing, is definitely a big shift in how we, kind of move water around to different uses in the state. So what those pilots are really looking at are basically, can we accurately measure consumptive use savings to get like an accurate amount in terms of like what's actually being delivered to a new use while avoiding injury to other water users. And so kind of looking at things like return flow changes and things like that. There's a lot of sort of engineering and technical work that goes into assessing consumptive use. And so, a lot of those pilots are kind of looking at ways to streamline that. And then, really, particularly for our West Slope ATM projects, it really is focused on, what are some of the agronomic impacts of deficit irrigation and temporary fallowing? Are there long-term issues with recovery? Are there, sort of benefits that might accrue? There's been some like interesting research out of CSU Extension's West Slope sort of Grand Valley office showing that, some of these temporary fallowing arrangements can actually like benefit the soil by resting it and, allowing, giving it time to recover or including some sort of cover crop rotation. So those are sort of the things that we look at in these pilots. And then, we try to work with those partners to sort of share those results and ultimately, hopefully encourage more participation in those types of programs if there's interest in doing so.
Thank you. Jeffrey had a question, so I will unmute. Or there you go.
All right. I was interested in particular in the payments for ecosystem services, Mac, that you mentioned, Alex. I'm wondering if there are cooperative programs. Perhaps it seems like there are great opportunities with Kate's operation in the Department of Agriculture. Here at Western, we've got a couple of master's students who have been doing some impressive things. Malcolm, who's on this discussion, is working with beavers to get them to store water in upland areas. And we have another student, Alexa Cooper, who's working with compost on grazing lands. And just wonder if you can say a little bit more about the future, perhaps, of payments for ecosystem services. It seems like there are lots of opportunities there.
Sure, I'll start. I'll definitely, I'm sure Kate has some thoughts on this because both our agencies have been working very closely on, there's under the new, sort of benchmarks for greenhouse gas reductions that the state adopted last General Assembly, the legislation sort of creating that framework. Ag hopefully will play some sort of beneficial role in that. So there has been a lot of research into sort of how we account for those carbon benefits. I would just say that there's a lot going on in Colorado. At the county level, in addition to San Miguel, Boulder County is doing a carbon farming program where they're doing some like long-term research into carbon sequestration and sort of monitoring that. There are, some groups looking at sort of the intersection with water quality and carbon sequestration. So using, measurement tools to look at, if we reduce nitrogen loading to streams and efforts to, improve water quality, are there climate benefits to that? But largely it seems that, there's still no like regulated market in Colorado or any sort of state market. I mean, it's largely kind of tied to some of these like voluntary marketplaces and things like that. And so that's sort of where we're so very much in the pilot phase, and that's been sort of our focus at CWCB has been, in particular, what are the co-benefits of some of these programs? So, if the target is maybe carbon sequestration, what are the co-water resource benefits as a part of that project? Because a lot of these things do have that angle as well. So we're trying to track that, and then, ultimately, hopefully connect that to the ability to, pay producers to adopt some of these practices. And there are a lot of private industry, I don't know, Kate might get a touch on this, but there's a lot of private groups that are kind of looking at that right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alex, you covered it really well. There is no established market, so it's really these pilots. Of course, we've got local governments like San Miguel who are supporting them, Boulder County, some private investment. I think there's actually rather large project down in southeast Colorado on rangeland out there. And then Alex was mentioning more of the marketplaces like Nori, for example, is one. I think that's gaining steam. A few others that are looking to develop pilots. And so what, really how I see our role at the Department of Ag, for one, our funding situation in terms of the grant availability is much different than CWCB. We actually lean on CWCB as funding partners sometimes as grant applicants from CDA to try and move some of this work along in partnership with them. So really, I think we're trying to make the environment in Colorado palatable to marketplaces that are legit and that are going to take care of our producers as we move through these pilot situations. So our goal in setting up a soil health program is that we'll have more producers who are able to again have some of the risk absorbed while they try to build new practices or invest in new practices on their farm or ranch, and then we can help connect them with opportunities for valuing or getting revenue from that stewardship in partnership with both private and public work going on to bring those payments for ecosystem services to Colorado. So we're really sort of a connector, a convener, and then our soil health program would be sort of a launch pad from which our producers could access these marketplaces.
Awesome. We had a question from Annie, so I'll have her unmute and she can ask.
Thanks. I've heard a lot of conversation today and throughout this year. I'm at Western student there, and I'm learning a lot about regenerative agriculture and soil health, and mostly on private land through voluntary producers. And I'm curious what is going on with, say, private or publicly managed land, such as BLM or Forest Service. Are any of the groups that you all represent engaging or partnering with those agencies to look at soil health? I think specifically maybe with rangeland management, cattle on those lands, and the dynamics where we're seeing invasive species emerge and just a dry climate out there, how we're trying to bring these issues to those public lands.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can talk a little bit from CDA perspective. So we partner with federal land managers, BLM and Forest Service in particular, on a number of issues pertaining to rangeland. And you mentioned invasive species. We do a lot of work on mitigation around that front. There's a couple of ways the state is engaged formally. We have good neighbor authority agreements that are agreements with the federal government around public land shared stewardship. Well, I guess now there's a shared stewardship, capital S, on those words that's similar to the good neighbor, but it establishes a more interconnected relationship with the state and federal land managers. So we actually have a shared stewardship agreement in the Southwest that's really looking at integrated stewardship of forest land, including BLM land, and involves our private land holders and our permittees on those rangelands. So there is infrastructure, there are all these tools to align our stewardship at the state and federal level. I think there's a lot to explore here, but we do have the foundation to move forward on public lands.
Cool. Yeah, I hadn't heard of any of those, so thanks. That's very interesting.
Do we have any other questions?
I have another one. I'm interested in how, Kate, you talked about the COVID experience is changing the ways that we think about supply chains and the whole food production and consumption system. And I'm just wondering, is Sue Wyman still on? I'm just wondering from a local producer's perspective, how she sees that experience and what that might mean for her in terms of farmers markets, CSAs, those kinds of things. But I'm not sure if she's still here.
Yes, I am still here, and we've seen a remarkable change, you know, as small producers. Of course, restaurants aren't buying, so, you know, any wholesale accounts that smaller producers had have gone away, at least for the short term. But we have experienced an incredible demand for local food. And at the same time, some of our seed vendors were selling out. I actually got personal phone calls from 3 of the seed companies that I buy from saying, look, we're going to service our existing customers, which is you, and we're running out of seeds for all the backyard gardeners. So it's a beautiful thing to see that consumers are suddenly really interested in healthy food and they're concerned about where their food comes from. And one specific example for me, and just sort of a benchmark last year versus this year, we produce pastured poultry so people can buy a whole frozen bird that we process on farm under the Colorado small farm exemption. And this time last year, I was still sitting on about 20 birds that were left over from the previous year. Not left over, we just spaced those out. And when COVID-19 hit, my phone rang off the hook, and in a matter of 2 weeks, I sold out of our meat birds, and won't have any till our little broilers that are out running around on the farm in their hoop coops till they're ready to harvest in about 3 weeks. And so I'm seeing a huge increase in demand for direct-to-consumer local food. At the same time, I'm really concerned about farmers markets. I'm plugged into a few of the resources through the Colorado Fruit and Vegetables Growers Association and the Colorado, I think it's the Farmers Market Association. And we're really trying to figure out how to safely be able to sell food directly to the consumer in this COVID-19 era. And if you've been to a farmer's market, there's usually a huge vibe. It's elbow to elbow and people are playing music and trying foods and all of that. Well, that's going to change the tenor of the market. But I think that the interest in local food is great enough that it certainly will continue. Our market will just look a little different this year. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you. I hope there are new ways to explore local food options, and that this leads to some fundamental rethinking of our food system.
Well, certainly, and I should say a lot more is going online. For me personally, it's been a little difficult because I'm stretched just trying to keep all of my plants and livestock and everything alive. That, you know, setting up an online platform for our small farm is a little daunting, but several of the other producers have done it, and there's interest in some kind of a local food hub to make that more efficient as well. So I think that there's some kind of neat changes that are coming out of this serious pandemic.
I know that earlier it was mentioned that there's been a shift more towards like CSAs. Do you guys do those, or is that something you've considered with having less contact with individuals?
Yeah, our farm is part of the Mountain Roots Multi-Farmer CSA, and it is already sold out for the year. And so we do contribute produce to that. It felt like a stretch, you know, kind of stretching me beyond my bandwidth for our farm to start its own CSA. But some of the other small producers here, Calder Farms and Iola Valley Farms, have started a CSA for the first time this year. That said, I do have an egg CSA, and the same thing happened with my eggs when COVID-19 hit. And I think it's partly because of supply chain disruptions and increases in prices for eggs at the supermarket. But suddenly I was selling out of eggs. And so, you know, that egg CSA has, you know, we're in our 5th year of running that, and it gets better every year, but this year was just through the roof after COVID-19.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Does anyone else have any questions? If not, we have a break scheduled until 2:45, so we could take a few extra minutes with that. Please jump in the chat if there's any more questions. But if not, Max will share another video that will play again during the break. And thank you again to all of our speakers during this first section. This has been huge and super important, and we appreciate all of you guys taking time for us, even on Zoom.